It's time to talk about the U.S. Men's National Team Nations League roster, which will be released next week by Mauricio Pochettino. I'm going to break down the 23-man roster as I see it, as I think it should be, and then I'm also going to discuss what I think Pochettino will do as we prepare for crucial games in the semifinal against Panama and potentially a final matchup against either Canada or Mexico. What up, guys? I'm Pete Douthit, host of the 11 Yanks Show. Welcome. If you're new, smash subscribe. We talk about American men's soccer. If you're not new and you're already subscribed, click the like button. And if you really want to help the channel out, click the notifications button. So when I do another video later, tomorrow, next week, Sunday, whenever, you'll get the notification and you can watch that one too. Leave a comment. Tell me your thoughts on the roster, what you think will happen, what you want to happen, and we can dig into it. Now, we do have a couple of injuries here, right? Folarin Balogun just is back in training, but he's not in the mix because he wasn't in the provisional 60-man roster. The 23-man roster has to be chosen from the provisional 60-man roster. Ricardo Pepi is obviously injured. Malik Tillman is still injured. Serginho Dest is in the provisional roster, and he will be on the bench this weekend. So we'll see if I have him in my roster, and we'll see if Pochettino has him in the roster. Other than that, Nathaniel Brown, the coveted left back / wing back from Eintracht Frankfurt, is a guy that was not in the provisional roster. We thought maybe he would be called in, that Pochettino would recruit him, but either one of two things has happened. Either Pochettino has not recruited him, which is probably the most likely, or Pochettino did try to talk to him and he was not interested. So that's unfortunate because that is a huge, huge loss for us if we don't get Nathaniel Brown. And I would not be surprised to see him in Germany's roster over the same window. All right, let's dive into it. Goalkeepers is a tough one. The only real guy that I know will be there for sure is Matt Turner. I have Patrick Schulte. I also have Diego Cochin. Schulte has not had a good start to the season. Even last season, he was capable of high-profile errors, right? Even though he's been in the roster pretty consistently since Poch took over, it's been an issue. Patrick Schulte does not inspire me with confidence right now. Look, Matt Turner is sitting on the bench at Crystal Palace, but at least in the FA Cup, he is performing well, and for lack of better options, he is still our number one, and I expect him to start both games. Diego Cochin is here because he is the future and because he is playing with, Barcelona's academy team and doing well. But the third goalkeeper, instead of going with just another random MLSer, which, by the way, the MLS goalkeepers are not impressing either. Zach Steffen did not have a good start to the season. Drake Callender has been benched over at Inter Miami. Nobody is really standing out and making a claim, although Ethan Horvath has started the last two games for Cardiff City. I haven't watched those games, so I don't know how he performed, but maybe he's in the goalkeeper pool still too. To be honest, it kind of feels to me like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other with some of the goalkeepers, because is Patrick Schulte better than Horvath, Drake Callender, Roman Celentano, Zach Steffen, Matt Fries? I'm just not sure there's a big gap between any of them right now. So it's like Matt Turner is the clear number one, and to be honest, goalkeeper 2 and 3, I would like Diego Cochin to be there as we keep him in the program and get him ready for his, future role with the national team. But it doesn't really matter at this point who's goalkeeper number 2 and number 3 because they're all not good. And even Matt Turner, look, he's a good serviceable goalkeeper for now, but he's hardly a Tim Howard or a Brad Friedel or some of these other goalkeepers we've had in the past, right? So whoever Poch brings, I'm going to say Patrick Schulte just because he's been involved with Poch thus far. It could be Schulte and Steffen. It could be Steffen and Cochin. Horvath could be there. It's just a lot of unknowns with the goalkeepers, and nobody is really standing tall and making a case to be in this goalkeeper pool. So it is what it is. This is what I'm going to bring, but you could make an argument for lots of guys, not because they're good, but because they're all equally bad. For fullbacks, I have Serginho Dest, Joe Scally, and Anthony Robinson. Caleb Wiley is just coming back from injury. John Tolkien is injured again. Lund is far from national team material. There aren't really any left backs that, you look at and you think they should be in that pool, right? Kevin Paredes is only now just starting to train again and come back from injury. And Poch has had no problem bringing minimal, fullbacks in the past, mostly because he can play other players at fullback too. And I agree with him, right? Chris Richards can play as a faux fullback in a back three. right? If Joe Scally is there, he's essentially playing as a center back, right? He doesn't bomb up the field. Anthony Robinson does that. And in possession, it looks like a back three. Now, if Serginho Dest is there, I don't know if that's going to look the same. And this is where I think a lot of people misunderstood what I was trying to say about Poch's 4-2-3-1 is with Joe Scally, who's a very defensive fullback, then yeah, it looks a lot more like a back three, right? But with Serginho Dest, who is nothing like a center back, who is not a defensive fullback at all, does that change? Does he then keep Anthony Robinson in a back three in possession and Serginho Dest is the one that operates more as a wingback? That remains to be seen. Personally, Serginho Dest is just coming back from an ACL injury. He's going to have 2 games with PSV Eindhoven, in which he's going to play how many minutes? I probably wouldn't start him. It's good to have him back, but the dude's been out for a year, and he might be in the roster. I think he probably will be in the roster, but I don't think he's going to start. I think, we have to be careful with him. And, the kind of Serginho Dest that you want is explosive. And we also have to see what he looks like after a rough ACL. Sometimes, not all the time, medical science is changing and players are coming back better than ever from big injuries like this. But I'm very curious to see what Serginho Dest now looks like after having suffered this ACL injury. But I think I would only bring these 3 because we know Tim Weah can play right back, Musa can play right back, McKennie can play right back, Richards can play, Adams can play right back. There are a lot of options that can play right back. And at left back, both Scally and Dest can play left back too. So I don't see the point in trying to stuff another fullback onto this roster, especially if we're limited to 23. Now, if it was a 26-man roster, that might be a different story, but it's not. So we have to sort of look at who's really going to bring the quality that we need, and it's these 3. And then after that, if we really get to a point where we need others, we have guys who can fill in. Center backs. I am bringing 5 center backs for now. Chris Richards, Mark McKenzie, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Tim Ream, and Noah Kai Banks, young center back of the future. Now, the one that's really left out of here is Austin Trusty, and I don't actually have a strong opinion about the rest of the center backs. The only ones that I care about and the pair that I think should start against Panama are Mark McKenzie and Chris Richards, both of whom are actually having very good seasons with, clubs in top 5 leagues. Mark McKenzie has been really strong for Toulouse and getting better every day. Chris Richards had a rough patch since coming back from his injury, but has really started to develop some form and fitness. And remember, both of these guys, Richards and McKenzie, are still young enough that they're not even in their prime. Center backs tend to develop later than others. So as they sort of build a partnership going into 2026, where you'll have a 27-year-old McKenzie, right, and you'll have a 25-year-old Richards, that's still, not even fully in their prime yet. And so I think this is the partnership that we need to develop going forward. Tim Ream is there for me for now, and he's really there as sort of an experience option, but not necessarily to start. And I think he is almost an assistant coach with the group at this point, and I think he would still be useful, but the days of Tim Ream starting for us should be over. Cameron Carter-Vickers has had an up and down season with Celtic. Had some very good performances, some very poor performances. So if you say, Pete, I don't think CCV should be there, I think Austin Trusty should be there, I'd say that's fair, but Trusty also has had good performances. He's had poor performances. It's been inconsistent from both of them. Both of them actually, Austin Trusty had very good games against Bayern Munich in the Champions League. Cameron Carter-Vickers did too until the last minute of the second game. And then it didn't look so good. He was partially responsible for the goal. Why not leave Noah Kai Banks at home and bring Trusty instead? I mean, honestly, I think I'd be okay with that, right? Like, of these 6, the 5 that I have here, plus Austin Trusty, I'm only really strong about McKenzie and Richards. Everybody else I could take or leave depending on Pochettino's discretion. The reason I would have Banks there is to prepare him for the future, for 2026, because I think he will be in that 2026 roster. He played a couple of games for Augsburg, has been on the bench, hasn't been playing as much recently as some of their injuries have been covered for, but he is still a very high-ceiling young center back, and I don't think it hurts to bring him in now and at least let him train with the group. That being said, if Poch thinks it's better to leave him at home with Augsburg over the international break and let him train and impress the coach, I'm okay with that too. Maybe we bring him in for a Gold Cup. So these are the 5 that I would bring, but I could absolutely be convinced that Trusty should replace one of Vickers, Ream, or Banks. The only thing I'm very firm on is no Miles Robinson. Miles Robinson has not been a USMNT caliber player ever. But for whatever reason, Pochettino likes him, or did like him, right? Even though he was terrible against Mexico, didn't look very good, to be honest, under, the games that mattered. And the problem was we had injuries back then, right? Carter Vickers was injured, Richards was injured. I'm talking about last year. This is the first time, knock on wood, that all of our center backs are healthy for a national team camp under Pochettino. So it's going to be interesting to see who he picks when everybody is available for competitive games. Because people talk a lot about what Poch has said. Poch has said this, Poch has said that. None of that matters. What matters is what he does, right? Like people are saying, oh, he loves MLSers. For competitive games, when everyone's available, he brings almost no MLSers. Tim Ream and a goalkeeper or two. One goalkeeper, Schulte. And Tim Ream's been in Europe his whole life. He just came to MLS last year. So whatever Pochettino says is all fine and good. Let's see what he actually does. That's where I think we will draw more conclusions about Pochettino and his preferences for certain players. Midfielders now, I bring Giovanni Reyna, Weston McKennie, Brendan Aronson, Tyler Adams, Johnny Cardoso, and Paxton Aronson. So only bringing 6 midfielders. And the guys that miss out here are, Tanner Tessman, Aidan Morris, Gianluca Busio. Those are probably the 3 that missed out from this camp. But, Busio he's actually been playing okay with Venezia. He's just on a very poor team. I have guys that can play the 10 here. Aronson can play the 10, although we all know he's not very good at it. Weston McKennie can play the 10 and is probably my choice to start. Giovanni Reyna has actually been getting minutes with Dortmund and not looking very good. So I'd still have him in the roster because he is an X factor for the national team, but I probably wouldn't start him. Johnny Cardoso and Tyler Adams have probably been our most impressive midfielders this season. I mean, Johnny Cardoso had a masterclass against Real Madrid last week. Tyler Adams is playing a big role for Bournemouth in their push to play Champions League football. So they're the ones that I would rely on. And of these 6, I would probably start Tyler Adams as the 6, Johnny Cardoso in the double pivot / more of an 8, because he can also distribute. And then you have Weston McKennie playing as I won't call him a 10. I'll call him as a creative attacking midfielder. Then you have guys like Brendan Aronson, Giovanni Reyna, and Paxton Aronson off the bench. Paxton Aronson has 11 goals for Utrecht in the Eredivisie this season and is really starting to find form. So he's certainly a guy that you can have there as well. You could make an argument, though, for a guy like Tanner Tessman, I think, because Tanner Tessman, although against better opponents in France, he hasn't looked very good. He's looked okay against mid-table and, lower table team opponents. The problem for Tessman is that we already have 2 sort of defensive midfield type players in Cardoso and Adams. So I don't really see the need to bring another, defensive midfielder. And for people saying, Pete, what about Yunus Musa? I actually have Musa in the wingers category because that seems to be where Poch can play him. But of course, Musa can also cover at the 8 and at the 6 and at right back. So really a utility man. We'll see what Pochettino does with Musa in this camp. Again, our data set on what Pochettino does is still small. So we're trying to sort of draw conclusions about what he's going to do. And so it's like, well, it's not huge sample sizes. And we're just sort of fumbling around in the dark here, guessing, what's it going to look like. Maybe he surprises us and plays Musa as, a central midfielder in this camp. So it's just hard to know. Forwards now, and I have Christian Pulisic, Timo Weah, Yunus Musa, and Alejandro Zendejas. Now, Timo Weah has mostly been in very good form for Juve. Actually, for me, our most improved player this season, despite playing at right back. Also has 11 goal contributions for the club. Musa has had an up and down season with Milan, but Milan has been an up and down roller coaster already. He is at least playing a lot of minutes for them. Christian Pulisic's, goal contribution streak has dried up recently, and that is largely due to an injury. Sergio Conceição said last week, Pulisic, has had a small physical problem for a month, and we have to manage it. You can see it in his physical freshness. That makes me think, will he even be in this roster? I guess it depends. It depends. We don't have enough data. What kind of injury is it? Is it a knock? Is it muscle tightness? What is it, right? That's the problem that, Pochettino and his staff are going to have to communicate with Milan. But I will say, if it's not a big issue, I think we should bring him. And because we are missing so many players already, And sure, we could probably get past Panama without Christian Pulisic, but Canada, Mexico, I think we have to have our best players. And, I saw somebody on Twitter say this doesn't matter. It does matter. It is our region. The bare minimum for our national team is to win regional trophies in CONCACAF and dominate. We have to stop acting like it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. Of course it matters, right? We have to win the Nations League, and then we got to go in the summer and win the Gold Cup. We are deeper in terms of quality and talent than anybody in this region, and we are playing at home. Now, lineup for lineup, like starting 11 versus starting 11, Canada can absolutely match us talent for talent. And I don't think we should be leaving players home for competitive games unless it is actually a serious injury or a real issue. If it is, well, then you should have got Nini Brown. This is where Nathaniel Brown would really help because he can play as a winger. And so now, our options on the left wing is probably to move Timo Weah to the left and then play Yunus Musa on the right, or maybe Gio Reyna has to play as a winger. I have Alejandro Zendejas as the fourth winger here. Haji Wright has been out for a long time, just came back and got some substitute minutes, but he doesn't look fit yet, right? And he's not in form, which is understandable when you've been out for so long. In the meantime, Alejandro Zendejas has picked up this year where he left off last year. He has been Club America's best player this year, right? The man has 10 goal contributions, 5 goals and 5 assists for Club America in just 8 games. And sure, it's Liga MX, but the way I see it is if you are absolutely dominating a league like Liga MX, if you are crushing it, that should at least earn you consideration for a depth spot on the roster, especially considering our injuries. Now, if Haji Wright was in form and playing super well, sure, that would be a different story. But he's not. He's just coming back from an injury. And there is nothing like confidence for a player like Zendejas to come in. And look, Zendejas gets a lot of fair hate from national team fans, including myself, for how he performed in the Gold Cup in 2023, right? We all remembered, this was his chance to stake his claim in the Gold Cup and make his mark on the national team, and he bungled it. So since then, fans have been understandably skeptical. It's like, well, does it really matter what you're doing in Liga MX if when you come and play for the national team, you look like shit? That's been the issue. But, it's been some time, okay? It was a year and a half ago. We have some injuries. There's a new coach. There's a new system. Why not give him one more shot, see what he looks like in training? I don't think it can hurt, just considering the options we have available. And then strikers, I have Josh Sargent and Damian Downs. Josh Sargent is the man at Norwich. He has never been the man for the national team, partially because of injuries, partially because it is a situation where there have been other strikers ahead of him, partially because he hasn't always performed for the national team. But now he's got his chance. He will probably start both games, unless he looks terrible in the first game. I don't know. But I think Josh Sargent is going to absolutely, I hope he crushes it. But before we get into Josh Sargent's performance for the national team, I want to read something that his coach said about him just recently. And keep in mind, before I read this, that Josh Sargent has been crushing it for Norwich, right? He has been there absolutely destroying. He's got 1 goal contribution almost every 90 minutes that he plays on the field. And yet, look at what his coach had to say. He needs to run more. When we look at the best 9s in the league above us, so he's talking about the Premier League, right? Or maybe he's talking about the league, the 9s that are above Norwich in the league, in the championship. They run more and they are more involved in the game. There are still moments in the game where it seems like he can be out of it for 5-10 minutes, where we need him to be involved. Because when he is, he's very good for us. It's probably just about pushing him a little more on that physical side. He will never be the most agile player in terms of changing direction in a small area, but he's quite fast, and so he can run. We'll try to get him to move even more and find new positions even more. In behind, show for the ball. In behind, show for the ball. All that stuff that he should keep going with for 90 minutes. That's where we are pushing him. And this is really important to understand, once again, when we talk about the debate between MLS versus Europe. If Josh Sargent was performing the way he is for Norwich in MLS, and by the way, he would be even better in MLS because he would absolutely own the league. But if he was, do you think any coach would be telling him, you need to be better at this? No, they would be singing his praises. There would be no pressure. He would be the man. It would be amazing, right? And everyone would be super excited about Josh Sargent. But no, he is in an environment where no matter how well he's playing, his coach is always trying to make him better, trying to push him, trying to improve elements of his game. And that is why we want our players in Europe. Cincinnati trying to, get Josh Sargent to come there after they did it with Weston McKennie. They're not going to grow in MLS. You think anyone in Cincinnati is pushing Josh Sargent? Josh Sargent would have 30 goal contributions in MLS and be an MVP candidate. He's being pushed in the championship to get better by his coach, even though he is balling out. This is the kind of mentality that we want from our players. It's why we want them in Europe. It's why we want them pushing themselves. Let's talk about Damian Downs, 20 years old. The dude has 13 goal contributions, 9 goals and 4 assists for FC Köln in the 2 Bundesliga. Well, Pete, it's the 2 Bundesliga. That is true. It is. He's also 20 years old. He's a young, up-and-coming striker. He is very physically dominant. He's very quick. He can play as a hold-up. He can stretch the back line. He's got a lot of talent and qualities that make me think he is going to be at least a serviceable striker in a top 5 league somewhere one day. He is also dual national. And because of the multiple injuries that we have, it is time to bring him in. He is in the provisional roster, and he did actually unfollow the DFB. That's the German Football Federation. After he was named, a few days before he was named into that provisional roster. So it looks like he will probably be there, and I think Poch will bring him. But also, we just don't have a ton of options, right? Your MLS strikers, Jesus Ferreira, by the way, is a backup. He is a substitute right now for, the Seattle Sounders. So make of that what you will. Patrick Agyemang and Brandon Vasquez, neither of them has registered a goal in 2 games so far in MLS. Both of them are much older than Dame. Agyemang's 24, Brandon Vasquez is 27. Neither of them are good quality strikers at all, despite what they do in Camp Cupcake or in the Gold Cup group stage. We're talking about a young, high-ceiling player. Of course, we don't know how high his ceiling is going to be, but I think it's time to bring in Damian Downs as a backup for Josh Sargent, get him involved with Poch, with the group, and tell him to push himself. It's like, look, we're going to go to a World Cup. We could probably bring 3 nines. If there's one injury and you're in the top 4 of the 9s, then you go to a World Cup, but you got to show it. I'm curious to see what Damian Downs looks like, and I would absolutely have him here. So that is my roster and a little bit about Pochettino's potential roster, which will drop next week. Of course, we will cover it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, guys. Smash that like button before you go. And thank you to BetOnline for sponsoring this video. I will see you all on Sunday for a top 10. Hopefully our boys will be balling out so we actually have 10 good performances to talk about. Once again, have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.